Welcome, everyone. On behalf of Paraclete Press, welcome to our virtual celebration and discussion today of Centering Prayers for Women, a daily devotional for drawing closer to the heart of God. We're so honored to be joined today by our author, Peter Traben Haas, and our forward writer, Judith Valente. My name is Rachel McKendry. I'm the publicist here at Paraclete. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. Just to let you know, we are recording our conversation today, and that will be available later on to share with anyone who couldn't join us. And of course, we'll also be letting you know how you can get your own copy of Centering Prayers for Women and all of our prayer books from Paraclete Press. Please take just a moment to find the Q&A button or the chat bar, or if you're joining us live streaming on Facebook, you can drop a question in the comments there. I'll keep my eye on those. And it will be lovely to talk together about this beautiful book. Just by way of quick introduction, Peter Traben Haas is an ordained pastor and a certified centering prayer instructor and retreat leader. He's the author of multiple books and articles on the contemplative Christian dimension, and he's an oblate of New Camaldoli Hermitage in Big Sur, California. Judith Valente is an award-winning journalist, poet, and author of 7 spirituality titles. She's a former staff writer for the Wall Street Journal and covered faith and values for many years for national PBS TV. She is a lay associate of Mount St. Scholastica Monastery in Atchison, and she guides frequent retreats on how to live a more contemplative life in the secular world. Thank you so much, Peter and Judith, for joining us. I still marvel at Zoom. Although none of us could have predicted what it would do for us through the pandemic, now we're still able to host gatherings like these that are quite literally international. Peter's joining us from Austin. Judith is joining us from Italy. Paraclete is here on Cape Cod. Our attendees are from all over the place. So I am truly thankful and always full of wonder at how these things work together. Thank you to all of you. Peter, I wonder if we could start out just by talking about this new book in particular, which is, it's so beautiful. I don't know how many of you who are joining us have actually been able to get your hands on a copy yet. It's hard to see through the screen, but it's a lovely size, fits so well in your hands, perfect for your purse or your bedside table or wherever it is that you like to keep these special things. The pages themselves are soft and beautiful with lovely little illustrations, and just 1 page per day, really. It's such a perfect size little resource. So Peter, I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about this new book.
Yeah, good to be together and welcome everyone. It's my first time meeting Judith today, so it's really special. And to know you, Judith, in this way, thank you. Paraclete Press is just been a blessing to me in agreeing and saying yes to publish my first book of prayers, centering prayers, this thing. And I guess it's about 11 years ago I first contacted Paraclete. I actually sent Paraclete, the publisher there, the printed copies, like 400 pages, and I wrapped it in a ribbon and, sent it off hopeful. But I was thinking about it, the fact that it's been 10 years now, and I don't exactly remember how the conversation began, but Robert Edmondson reached out to me, who is the publisher, editor-in-chief, and suggested that a second edition come out, but in particular be finessed or focused toward women, which I thought was was a really great idea. And so it wasn't my idea, but my next question was, well, I'm a guy, who's and he assured me that they could finesse it in such a way that they brought in a team of people to do that, and we worked together on that. And of course, Judith's forward gives that feminine voice to the book and the flavor, of course, the design, all of that. But the origins of this women's version was really Paraclete's idea, and I just loved it. And in my experience of leading centering prayer retreats, it's probably 80 to 20, 80% feminine, female presence at the retreat. So it kind of makes sense to me that might be the reading audience for a book that is designed to be prelude or postlude to times of centering prayer.
Peter, could you tell us a little bit about your own spiritual journey and discovery of the contemplative life and centering prayer as a practice?
Yeah. The truth is that I stumbled upon meditative prayer without knowing what it was. And I was a very earnest and zealous young man spiritually. I was a freshman or sophomore at Moody Bible Institute, and I was working the front desk, the 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. shift. And I specifically chose that shift because I could basically get paid to do homework. And I loved to pray early in the morning. So I'd start praying about 4:30. There was a stretch of time where no one was walking in. And I have an intercessory prayer list that was very verbal, very word-based, very wordy. And I had no formation in the monastic tradition, but it basically was a prayer of the hours. And I created my own prayer of the hours, basically, using liturgy and stuff that I'd pieced together. So I was very ignorant about the tradition of the prayer of the hours in the monastic lineage at that point in my life. So I just kind of created this prayer guide, and over the year or so I was doing this, it became ingrained in my heart. So I didn't have to particularly look at the sheet. But because it was so early in the morning and I wasn't getting a lot of sleep, I noticed that I wasn't falling asleep when I was praying, but I was closing my eyes and I could feel like my heart was praying. It was just, that was how I described it. And at the time, I actually felt guilty that I really wasn't praying, because everyone that I talked to in that context, that evangelical context, said that prayer is, intercessory prayer. You need to use words, and certainly liturgical prayers used words. But so I felt like I was just falling asleep. But actually, I was discovering this deep rest and the prayer of the heart. And I kind of stumbled upon it, and I came to really love and prefer that deep silence. And so after about 4 or 5 years of this, after I'd graduated, moved on and doing different things, I kept the practice of just being silent in the early morning in the dark, lighting a candle and just being still and quiet. And the guilt dropped away. Well, several years went by. I graduated from seminary, was in my first year or two of being a pastor, a Presbyterian pastor. And I came across the teachings of Father Thomas Keating. I think it must have been his book, Open Mind, Open Heart. And I started to read this in terms of the method that he presented. And I realized that I had stumbled upon basically the prayer of the heart, or Hesychia, or the prayer of stillness, or the prayer of the cave of the heart, all these different terms centering prayer. And so I started to really deepen my practice, morning and evening, and gave myself to that practice a lot. Started doing retreats, which changed my life in a way. Deep healing on those retreats, 5-day, 10-day centering prayer retreats in the silence. And for a good 10 years of my life, retreats and daily centering prayer twice a day. The actual method of centering prayer was what I used. And so what ended up happening is that after my time in the silence every morning, starting around 2009, I started to write after my prayer period. And that's where the prayers came from. They came out of the silence. And then I started to collect them and share them online on a blog. And then I ended up putting them together and sending them to Paraclete. So they literally are prayers from the silence. They were birthed in the silence. And so that's, some part of my journey, at least regarding centering prayer.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And lucky us to be the recipients of all those years of development and writing. Thank you. Judith, I'd love to hear some about your experience too with centering prayer and the contemplative movement. I know you're so active in teaching and involving others in that too. I'd love to hear about your roots there.
Muted. Okay,
Oh,
sorry.
thank you.
There we go. I guess you could say my spirituality is a cross between the Ignatian and the Benedictine. I was educated by the Jesuits and learned about Saint Ignatius of Loyola at a young age, of course. But then there was always a piece missing for me. You know, Ignatius wanted us to be contemplatives in action. And I think people drawn to centering prayer want to be contemplatives in action. And that missing piece for me was the Benedictine emphasis on prayer and contemplation. And once I brought those two traditions together, the Ignatian and the Benedictine, I suddenly found what I had been looking for. And so many things that Peter writes about, or so many of his reflections in the book really resonate with me on my spiritual journey, because he mentioned centering prayer as a prayer of the heart. And one of my mentors is a Trappist monk, Brother Paul Quinnen, who studied under Thomas Merton. Merton was his spiritual director. And he talks about prayer as being present with the presence. And I think that's everything that Peter's book is about. Prayer as an experience, not prayer as something we master, because I don't think we ever master centering prayer. I'm still trying to master centering prayer after a decade of having been introduced to it. And I'm sure Peter might back me up on that, might say his was a similar experience. So that's a little bit about what I could say. And then one other thing Peter said struck me about, well, why do we do a book of prayers for women? What's that about, But it is true. In 2018, I left daily journalism to do my retreat work with busy professionals. And I would say, Peter, 95, 99% of the people who come are women, and I'm still working on that. We might get one man, and I jump up and down when I see one man, but we'll work on that a little bit more, because this is spirituality for everyone. And Peter's book is, as I say in the introduction, is for everyone.
And I love that. Paraclete is based in a Benedictine monastic community. We do the Liturgy of the Hours and Gregorian chant, but we are also an ecumenical community. And I think that's something that intrigues me, the fact that both of you come from such different backgrounds, the fact that the contemplative movement and centering prayer is such an open door for people from so many traditions. So I think for those of us who aren't so familiar with it, but want to try, how do you begin? Peter, do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I think it's a great question, and people are contemplative and they don't know it. I think every human being is designed with the contemplative heart. It's just life that distracts us and keeps us from cultivating it and engaging with it. But every time I see my wife's daughter, our daughter, nurse her 3-year-old, I say, there's two contemplatives. They don't know it, but the devotion, the surrender, the consent, the presence that they have to one another is so beautiful that it symbolizes to me the spirit of the contemplative disposition. I was a pastor in Iowa for a while and absolutely loved serving that community. And not all of Iowa is flat. There's a lot of Iowa that's hilly and beautiful, of course. And in the fall, I would talk to some of the men who would go out deer hunting. And I'd ask them, what are you doing up there? And well, we sit in our deer stands and just watch. And I thought, these guys are contemplatives, but they're just using deer hunting as an excuse to be contemplative. And that you can't just sit there and be still all day and do nothing and not start to feel into that beautiful space of the heart. And I think a lot of guys do that. So I think there are a lot of ways that the contemplative dimension draws people, that they find their life unworkable and they start to experience a retreat or a practice like examine at the end of the day. And little by little, people start to feel more comfortable with the silence. I know that silence is almost torture for a lot of people. At first, they would rather die than be in the silence alone. But little by little, I think people do start to put their toe in and experience the blessedness of the silence. And I think practices beget practices. So practices like taking a walk in the woods, all of a sudden a couple months go by and someone starts to have a capacity for more silence and they need more. And so little by little, I think that we all have this capacity for silence. And there are obviously the traditional pathways into the meditative practices, like Judith was saying. But I think for most people, there's a real aha moment in realizing that when they go on a day or a weekend retreat, they might resist it at first. It might be terrifying, but at the end, almost everyone says, this was the most extraordinary experience of my life. This is like a God spa. I'm coming back. I'm doing this again. Can I do a longer one? It's really the one necessary thing that undergirds everything. And it's the one essential thing. And unfortunately, most people aren't willing to try it. Churches try everything else but the silence. They buy every other curriculum but practicing being silent together. And I think the results we see the results everywhere. The lack of silence creates conflict, and silence as a way, you can't disagree in the silences. So it's a very healing thing. It's very compelling. And just one last thing, I think the most attractive thing that draws people into the silence is when they meet someone who is coming from the silence. It's very attractive, that stillness and that centeredness that is the fruit of the Spirit in our lives through the prayer is a good witness to other people. And whether they ask you in words or not, they're wondering, how do you get like that? You seem so peaceful.
Peter, listening to you, I'm thinking of Merton's famous line from Thomas Merton, where he says, "There is so much talking that goes on that is utterly useless. It is in the sky, in the trees, in the redwoods, that you will find wisdom. In the silence." In other words, in the silence, everything begins to connect. And I think to answer Rachel's question about how do you begin by beginning. Somebody once told me when I was starting my writing career that writing is a matter of applying the seat of the pants to the seat of the chair. And I think I think the same goes for centering prayer, that you try it, and then possibly you affiliate, you join a group of like-minded people. And then it sort of grows from there. But I think we never master it. There's that Benedictine saying, always we begin again. And I think that's true of our prayer lives as well.
Thank you. I'm just reminding those of you who are joining us today that you can feel free to send in any questions that you might have for Peter or Judith. You can use the chat bar, you can use the Q&A button, or I'm keeping my eye on the Facebook chat here too. So we welcome you to join the conversation. I wonder if there's something, that both of you have been describing, Peter, especially in that image of your wife's daughter and the child, about the vulnerability of silence, the vulnerability of then encountering someone who's been in silence that is at the same time attractive, as you say, but then also terrifying to people, especially now.
Well, and I think that's where Father Thomas Keating's teachings, especially his video series on the spiritual journey, were so helpful, because he updated and integrated basically the spiritual journey model from John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila, and integrated with modern psychology in terms of the developmental phases of the spiritual journey, but also adding to that the level of the unconscious that, you know, is a very modern understanding, and integrated and updated the deadly thoughts from Evagrius and John Cassian in the monastic tradition. And he brought all this stuff together, and in a very simple and powerful, very, you know, very winsome way, as only he could, I suppose, and charted out the psychological stuff that ends up being very important in understanding what happens when you start sitting in the silence. And this is why I think Thomas Keating, and I really compliment him so much, because he was really the first person to put in writing some of the more psychological aspects of the fruit or the results, or you could say that help understand the experience of meditation. So, for example, his little phrase, unloading of the unconscious, that this is that thoughts are inevitable, normal, and integral to the process, and that the unloading of the unconscious is a part of the healing of a lifetime of accumulated stuff and wounds and trauma and early childhood formation. So there's a theology and a psychology that he brought forward to help us to understand kind of some of the experiences that happen when we sit in the silence. You know, my first 10-day centering prayer retreat, on the third day, I'm sitting in the room with 30 other people, and I'm just drenched with tears, just drenched, hot, warm tears, you know, just dripping. I had no idea why I was crying. It was like a sponge getting squeezed out. And this is the unloading of the unconscious, the presence and action of the Holy Spirit, which is the quintessence of what happens when it's not that I'm praying, I'm being prayed, more so in the silence. And that squeezing of the sponge of my consciousness and my mind and my body, something was being released energetically at a physical level. And it took me a couple days to kind of figure out what was going on there. And it turned out that I was really grieving and getting in touch with deep emotions around my relationship with my brother, which has been a source of pain for both of us, and trauma. And so what do you know? You know, there's the unloading of the unconscious, the presence and action of the Holy Spirit's deeply psychological. And oftentimes in centering prayer, people get worse before they get better. In other words, the shit comes up like shrapnel, comes up out of the wound. You didn't know it was buried there. And people can get aggravated, they can get irritable, they can get restless. It can manifest in all sorts of ways, including the deadly thoughts. All of those deadly thoughts start to manifest in the silence. So I don't know if that's helpful, but it's been something in my experience. I'm curious what Judith has to contribute.
I have a question here. Judith, unless you want to jump in on that too.
No,
Okay, I have a question here for both of you from Michael Turner, who he says, thanks for the presentation. Could the presenters speak to the importance and role of a second session of centering prayer each day? Blessings. Thanks, Michael. Judith, do you want to?
well, yeah, it's great if you could do a second session. A lot of the people I meet are still in the work world, off in the corporate world, and it's hard to get one session in. So if you are in a position to get two sessions in, you know, that's two is better than one, I would say, but it's not possible for everyone.
Peter, do you have a thought about that one?
I agree. That's been my experience myself, and talking with a lot of people, that second sit is oftentimes the hardest And people who wait later into the day, like after dinner, tend to fall asleep or not feel like it's that the sleep overcomes them. So I think something's better than nothing, even if it's 5 minutes. Or sometimes it's just looking out at the window and coming into oneself and looking at the sunset just for a moment or a breath that can be useful. But something's better than nothing. And I think the most important thing is to have a place, a sacred place where you can go, and to try and keep that rhythm, throughout the week. And it's helpful to have a special place and a special time where you can do that. But the truth is, Michael, the truth is that the formal method of centering prayer drops away. I asked Father Thomas Keating if he practiced centering prayer. He said, not the method. I said, oh, that's interesting. What do you mean? He said, well, the method serves contemplation. And people confuse the finger pointing to the moon as the moon. And so the method of centering prayer serves the experience of the state of contemplation, which is different. And when you reach that inner bridal chamber, or whatever, there's lots of different ways of describing the cave of the heart experience. All method drops away, and we're all experiencing the same thing. And it can, in 1 second, one little drop of that is nuclear power, and you don't need 30 minutes and you don't need a lifetime. And once you're in the unitive place, you don't need a lifetime trying to get to the unitive place. You're there. Now you go spend it.
I think that's a really good point, Peter. And, something that the Trappist monks tell me is that, they try to make everything that they do contemplative. They make fruitcakes over at the Abbey of Gethsemane. And Brother Paul, when he was making fudge, he's now a cook. He's back in the kitchen, my friend, Brother Paul. But when he was making fudge, he said, I often said, the Jesus prayer, Jesus, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner, over and over. So they make of what they are doing a contemplative thing. And as somebody who worked in a busy newsroom most of my career, with all kinds of stuff going on around me and people's tempers exploding from time to time, I think carrying that contemplative attitude into wherever you are is a sort of centering prayer. There's the formal thing we do, as you say, Peter, whether you can do 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a half an hour, wonderful. But then there's these other things that we can do during our day. The Benedictine Sister Macrina Whitaker, what I believe one of your authors also said, take sacred pauses during your day. And I love that, because I've got to navigate in the real world. I wish I could be in the monastery all the time, but I can't.
Absolutely. What, you mentioned, I think you said it, the Ignatian action and contemplation. And Brother Paul also happens to be one of our poets here at Paraclete, and his collection Amounting to Nothing is fantastic. And there's one poem in particular, I wish I could quote it, about making soup.
Mm-hmm.
That, Peter, you talk about suddenly you find yourself with warm tears on your face and quietly reading poetry, quietly going, praying that your daily devotional with this book, whatever it is, something about being able to apply that contemplative practice to whatever you're doing. And you'll be able to quote it better than I can, but for those of us, who don't live in the monastery, but we're at home, we're oblates, we're, lay members, to know that you can still apply those practices, whether you're vacuuming or cooking or taking care of the kids or at your desk. There's something that I find very comforting and unifying between all of us, really trying to head in the same direction through all these practices. And I haven't done a lot of centering prayer myself, but from the way you're talking and what I know of these books, it just seems so applicable. It's not something high and lofty. It's something right here that we can all do. I wonder, Peter, if now might be the time, if you would just be willing to lead us in a little bit of a time of centering prayer together.
Yes, happy to. And then I'll end the prayer with the prayer for today. Would that work?
Yes, perfect.
From the book? Okay. So today is the 26th of April. And let me get that prayer up. Okay, so I'll just share my screen and for our time in centering prayer. So let us rest now in the silence of God's love for a brief period of centering prayer. Lord Jesus, eternal Christ, I request for my life and for my beloveds forgiveness of every debt, provision for every need, strength for every weakness, comfort for every trouble, healing for every sickness, peace for every anxiety, joy for every sorrow, presence for every absence, bread for every hunger, water for every thirst, shelter for every storm. You are the miracle. I await your whisper in the silence and envision your word breathing these miracles to life. Amen.
Thank you so much to both of you.
Well, thank you, Rachel and Peter. It's been an honor.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel, for hosting and putting this together. And Judith, such a blessing to meet you. And thank you so much for the forward and for your awesome books.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you to all of you who have joined us for this time together today. I just want to hold up both of these devotional books from Peter again. This is the original version, and this is our new Centering Prayers for Women. And it's that time of year, well, every time of year is a gift-giving time of year, but right now, with Mother's Day and graduations and Father's Day and so many commercialized seasons, it's a wonderful opportunity to give something very meaningful. And I find that these books really do make a lovely gift. In celebration of this new edition in particular, right now, if you want to place an order with Paraclete Press, you can buy one copy and get another copy for 50% off. So we encourage you to think of all of those people in your life who could use this gift of quiet and contemplation and prayer, and consider making this a gift to them. Thank you again for joining us. God bless you, Peter. God bless you, Judith, in your travels. And we hope to talk again soon.
Yes, and God bless you and Paraclete. Thank you all.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Peter. Take care, everyone. Thank you so much.